Bailiff, if you can contain the crowd, we will get ready for the main event this evening. I'd like to call to order tonight's City of Santa Barbara Harbor Commissioner meeting, November 5th, 2018. Jeanette, would you call roll, please?
Yes, Bill Spicer.
Here.
Jim Sloan. Here. Betsy Kramer. Here. Lang Sly.
Here.
John Stedman. Here. Shoham Yaniv.
Here.
Merritt McRae is absent.
Very good. Okay. Mr. Reedman, any changes to tonight's agenda?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. There are no changes from staff tonight.
Okay. This is our public comment section. And just for the record, our public comment has always been a 2-minute window, which we have very liberally allowed people to speak as long as they like. So for those at home, please, you're welcome. So please speak. Approval of the minutes. I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. An abstention. And any noes? Okay. We've gotten that details done. We're up to the director's report.
Well, good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Since we last met, Carl in particular has been working with our Washington, D.C. lobbyist with the firm of Carpy and Clay, and staff is preparing to submit budget requests for the fiscal year 2020 budget cycle. These requests will be formally submitted to the offices of Senators Feinstein and Kamala Harris and Congressman Carbajal in the first quarter of 2019 to align with the federal budget cycle. There's still an earmark ban in place, but the mechanism, this is still kind of the mechanism by which the city gets its requests up to the federal level and tries to, we try and do our best to ensure that we have adequate dredge funds. The 2020 request is $3.6 million, increase over 2019, which will allow the Corps to absorb escalating costs from all the, as you can imagine, all the infrastructure needs all over the country. So, Senators Feinstein and Harris and Congressman Carbajal have been very helpful in the past to secure dredge funding for Santa Barbara Harbor and the other small California harbors from the U.S. Corps. Last month we talked a little bit about job opportunities at the Waterfront Department, and as I mentioned then, the department's administrative clerical supervisor retired recently after over 30 years of service, and as I mentioned last month, Jeanette Brzezinski was selected to fill that position, so now she's working 3 positions essentially until we get, well, 2.5 I guess now. We conducted a promotional recruitment that's within the city to fill Jeanette's former position as executive assistant, and we will conduct interviews shortly. Probably we're aiming for next week if we can squeeze it in. We're trying to make this stuff move along, and the application period is now closed. The department's former harbor operations assistant at the front counter, Ana Maria Pinado, accepted a position with the city's finance department. She seems very happy up there, so that left us with an opening at the front desk. It's a 5-day-a-week job. And Samantha Casey was recently hired to fill that position, harbor operations assistant, and she's been working for a couple of weeks with us now. She was hired through a competitive recruitment process, and interestingly, prior to working for the Waterfront Department, she spent 5 years in the U.S. Army as a satellite communications operator and maintainer. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And additionally, administrative analyst Dominique Samario has accepted a position with the city of Goleta, so we'll be sad to see her go. But we will hold a recruitment as soon as possible for that as well. And that's about that for the recruitments. I get confused because we're having so many moving parts right now. I get the positions all mixed up. But on Thursday, November 8th, Mayor Mario Carl Treiberg and his wife Debbie and I attended the 50th anniversary, the golden anniversary for United Cerebral Palsy Work, Inc. At the El Paseo restaurant. And UCP Work, Inc. is dedicated to providing services to residents of the Tri-Counties with mental or physical disabilities. I know you've all seen them around the harbor, just so that they can live a little more independently and have meaningful jobs within the community. They provide we're one of the oldest contracts that they have since they formed the two organizations, United Cerebral Palsy and Work, Inc. And we've been working with them for about 25 years now at the waterfront. And it's one of the department's largest contracts. But it's really well appreciated, well received by the business owners and the slip holders as well, just to see these folks out there, doing something and cleaning the harbor. So they do a good job, and we appreciate it. Tentative agenda items for the December meeting: possible license agreement with the Santa Barbara Youth Sailing Foundation, and possible lease amendment about a 10-year lease extension with the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History Sea Center. Those are both up with the city attorney right now. I will add that, as you all know, December is kind of a tricky month with everybody's schedules and things, so it's pretty likely we might not have that meeting, and we'll be having these items in January. And that concludes my report, unless there are any questions.
Very good. Any questions? Commissioner.
Scott, what is the license agreement? What's the nature of that agreement with the Youth Sailing Foundation?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Stedman, it's a water license area right at the beginning of Marina One on the ocean side, on the breakwater side. And it's all kind of related with, it's not part of the yacht club, but it's sort of, they graduate from the seashells sort of and go to the Youth Sailing Foundation and then hopefully into the yacht club. It's kind of the way it flows. But it's a nonprofit. I think what do they sail, Carl? Lasers and sabots and lasers and stuff.
Got it. Okay. I just was wondering about that relationship. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? I just wanted to, my appreciation for Work, Inc. and the Waterfront's willingness and long-time relationship with them. That's great. And then also to Ms. Samario, obviously our loss is Galita's gain, so best of luck. Moving on to business report, Mr. Bossy.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I have a brief seasonal business services report. First up, yes, it's that time of year again already. The holiday season is upon us. And for the 8th consecutive year, the Waterfront Department is working with the Stearns Wharf Business Association to bring a Christmas tree to the shoreward finger of Stearns Wharf. Oliver Holt Christmas Trees will be delivering the 25-foot tall green-white fir Christmas tree on Monday, November the 26th, so not too far from today. And our facility staff will be installing it and decorating it, and then it'll be lit up, but the official lighting will take place with Mayor Kathy Murillo prior to the Parade of Lights on December the 9th. And this tree will be on display from, again, Monday, November 26th through the first week of January 2019. We also have the other Christmas lights being installed around the harbor, so please come on down both to the wharf and the harbor and check out the seasonal displays. It's a great sight. And then also seasonally, but on a different note, our waterfront parking permits will be available starting December 1st. And these permits are valid from the date of purchase through December 31st of 2019. So if you purchase those in early December, you basically get 13 months out of the deal as opposed to 12. And the general permits this year, which are also known as our red permits, cost $125. And our slip permittee permits, and those are one per slip, will cost $95. The permits will be sold in the Harbor Main kiosk. They will also be sold at the waterfront office, and then we'll also be providing a table out on the walkway by the coral trees adjacent to the Harbor Main kiosk for people walking by and passing through. Now, if you want to get the slip permittee permit, that can only be purchased inside the waterfront offices. So again, we're encouraging residents and slip permittees to purchase their permits early to get the maximum amount of use of those permits. And this year's design was done by our parking supervisor, but the design itself was done by Allison Gruey, who's the city's graphic designer. So we're thankful for her efforts in helping us out with this. And that concludes my business services report for this month. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Bossy? Brian, do you know where that tree camp comes from, the Christmas tree?
I do. It's from Oliver Holt Christmas Trees, and they have a number of farms in the Southland, believe it or not. So Southern California. Their main office and headquarters is, believe it or not, Chatsworth. I didn't know it was a big Christmas tree
Known for
community,
forestry?
but I don't know. So, they do a good job for us every year, and they're easy to work with, and we're happy to have them on board.
Absolutely. Thank you. Oh, Commissioner.
Brian, with the parking permits, do the new rules go into effect on that, or have we finalized the new rules on quantities and things like that?
On quantities, I think you might be
the
talking
key
about the
cards.
gate keys.
Key-
Yeah, so two different things.
Right,
so
right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was confusing the two.
no problem. I do it all the time. So yeah, two totally separate items. And the gate keys we're working on the quantity issues in the past, and we've been
And so
doing it.
but the new pricing goes into effect on the parking.
The new pricing on the permits goes into
Right,
effect,
right,
yes,
right.
to
Okay.
the $125 for the general,
Right.
and then $95 for the
Correct.
slip permit tees. So each went up $25.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Brian. Mr. Triberg, Facility Management Report, please.
Good evening, Chair Spicer and Commissioners. It's time again to begin dredging at the harbor. Pacific Dredge will start the fall cycle dredging here in a couple weeks. They've already put up the yard on West Beach, and they'll begin mobilizing the dredge pipeline next week, and that's the discharge location on East Beach near Calle Cesar Chavez, the intersection of Calle Cesar Chavez and Cabrillo Boulevard, and then they dig up a little bit of the pipe on West Beach so they can get out to the areas that need to be dredged. Pacific Dredge was awarded a 3-year contract by the Corps of Engineers in 2016. The contract consists of 6 cycles. Fall dredging is the first cycle, spring the second, and on each year, a single cycle. This is the 5th of 6 cycles. It allows for 120,000 cubic yards of dredge sediments per cycle. After the 6th cycle this spring, there'll be the end of this contract. They'll be required to completely demobilize, and that means removing everything from the harbor and the beaches. It's kind of disruptive, and then they turn right around and let a contract again about 3 or 4 months later. It's a little bit frustrating to go through this, but we do it every time, and it seems to work out. So it'll be busy on the beaches later this spring. The Corps budget and contracting, there was $3.36 million appropriated in fiscal year 2019. Although it's a 3-year contract, it's an annual appropriation. As Scott mentioned, we're working with Senators Feinstein and Harris and Congressman Carbajal to secure the FY 2020 funding on the order of about $3.6 million. This can get adjusted in Congress or the Senate or by the President, so we aim a little bit high. It usually comes in at about that. And then, as I mentioned, they'll solicit bids in October 2019 for another 3-year contract. One thing of note is the variability in the amount of sand that's available. This particular slide covers a lot of years, but last year, believe it or not, was the least amount of sand dredged since we've ever been recording this. It was a total of about 150,000 cubic yards compared to, we have many single cycles where there's well over that in the fall or the spring. Our total average is about 267,000 a year. Our spring about 150,000, the fall about 116. What's important to note about this is the contract allows for 120,000 cubic yards per cycle. So we typically exceed that in any given year, whether it's in the fall or the spring cycle. And the Corps of Engineers has been very responsive and very successful in securing additional funds. The contract is set at an amount to kind of cover that 120,000 yards. So there are years like you see in 2014 where the spring cycle had almost 350,000 yards just for that cycle alone. And the Corps was able to get funding in a variety of ways. There's emergency funding and work plan funding, but they have been successful in securing additional funds, and every year we're very grateful to them. We work with our representatives and our lobbyists in Washington, D.C., so it's something of note. It's going to be business as usual. We just request mariners take caution when they navigate around the dredge. It should take about 2 weeks, be finished before the Parade of Lights is the goal. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. That's it for the facilities report.
Any questions for Mr. Treiberg?
No questions.
I have 2 questions, actually. As I recall, some or all of the sand last time went to Goleta beaches. Is that a typical, is that right? And is that a typical deposit spot?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Sly, we had extra work done on West Beach, which is outside of the federal channel. The year before last, we trucked some of that sand to Goleta Beach. Last year, we dredged West Beach, but discharged it in the same location on East Beach. So the core dredging is always discharged on East Beach. About every 5 to 10 years, we wind up working with the county to get some sand up to Goleta Beach. The sand off West Beach is kind of surplus sand. It's not removed by the Corps, and kind of depends on their need and the sort of funding they have available. It's done at their cost. So there won't be anything going to Goleta Beach in the foreseeable future.
Okay, thanks. And my other question was, and maybe I misinterpreted this, but the way I read it, the spring dredging would be the last cycle within the current 3-year contract.
Correct.
So fall of 2019 would be the first cycle in the next contract. And then it goes on to say that the new 3-year contract would be bid in the fall of 2019. So I was confused that it sounded like the bidding for the contract and the first phase of the contract both happened in the fall of 2019. Kind of
they do. It's very close. Their fiscal year starts October 1st, and that's kind of when the funding drops for them, and typically a continuing resolution. Yeah, so it happens pretty quickly. We prefer a little bigger buffer. Wouldn't mind if they bid it out in August or September, but they still manage to get the work done. The same contractors won the bid the last 3 times. They've made the dredge so much more efficient that what they used to take over a month to do, they can do in 10 days now. So even though it seems a little late in the year, if they let a contract in October and they dredge in December, they still tend to get the work done before the winter storms arrive. But you're correct.
Any others? Yes,
Yeah, I have a
Commissioner.
question, Carl. So the current dredge is powered electrically, correct?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Stedman, that's correct.
So are there any other competing dredge operations that are also electric?
There are very few. There have been competitive bids. The other bidders haven't won the bid. They would be required to electrify the dredge. The requirement to have an electric dredge is a state law by the State Air Resources Board. It's a rule. And fortunately, Pacific Dredge and their predecessor had set up an electric dredge, and like I said, they've made it much more efficient these last few years. So there are others, but not a lot. Pacific Dredge kind of has an advantage because they've been here and they have a very highly efficient machine, and so they're their costs are competitive. They're a bit tough to compete with. But yeah, that's correct. Electric dredge, and that's the requirement. And we've talked with the state about changing it, but since we've gotten good bids the last several times, the Corps and the waterfront, we haven't pursued allowing diesel dredges to get in. We've been satisfied with what we've gotten from Pacific Dredge and the electric dredges.
So it's likely that Pacific Dredge will continue in the next cycle.
Well, I know they're
Highly
interested. I know they'll submit a bid for sure, and I would assume they'd be competitive, but you never know. We do get some other bids sometimes, but like I said, it's a little tough to compete with them. And they sharpen their pencil. They're good prices, or else the Corps wouldn't accept those bids. They'll reject bids if they're exceed the budgeted amount by a lot, or if they were to double their price, they would reject it and probably do the work themselves.
Thank you.
I had one quick question. Do you have a method, or do we measure or anticipate how much sand is going to be removed this cycle?
Chair Spicer, we don't do any of the volume calcs ourselves. It's all done by the Corps and the dredge contractor. So their first day that they'll survey will be on the day they start, November 26th. We'll have a meeting a couple days later, and we'll kind of know how much there is out there. There's rarely a lot of sand in the fall cycle. Usually 120,000 yards is enough. It's the spring cycle that gets really tricky depending on the amount of swells we get and the storms, and that's where we always worry quite a bit. Almost every time they've exceeded the contracted amount, it's always been in the spring. But as I mentioned, the Corps has been really, really responsive and successful at gaining extra funds when necessary.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, sir. That brings us to Mr. Cronman, Harbor Operations.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Well, needless to say, we had an epic Harbor and Seafood Festival last month, the 17th annual. 15,000 people plus showed up, and the centerpiece is always, the barbecue and boiling pit and all the boats selling everything from fresh crab, lobster, and sea urchin, uni, and shrimp along the pier to the albacore barbecue and the boiling pots where folks can take their crab and their lobster and drop them in and end up getting them handed to them, plated and ready. By that time, they're usually pretty hungry because it does take a little bit of time. But all of this was a testimony of the importance of Santa Barbara's commercial fishing fleet, whose economic benefits, I think we discussed this a couple of months ago, approach $30 million a year. So it's really on display during the Harbor Festival. It was a fantastic event. Meanwhile, we had bands playing on two separate stages throughout the event, and 40-plus vendors who enjoyed brisk, steady sales, everything from, well, you can imagine, everything from clothing to jewelry and back again. The event included free boat rides aboard the Azure Seas and the Double Dolphin, thanks respectively to Captain Fred Hirschman and Skip Abeg. They carried nearly 700 passengers that day on their free boat rides, and sometimes the numbers really tell this story better than anything. In addition to that, the dockside tours of the Harbor Patrol boat, Coast Guard cutter, NOAA's research vessel Shearwater, and the tall ship Spirit of Dana Point entertained hundreds and hundreds of more folks. But more than ever, the 60 volunteers, and I credit Dominique Samaro with a lot of her outreach on this. She did a brilliant job. More than ever, some 60 volunteers helped make the event seamless, especially considering the buzz and hectic craziness of trying to get all this food prepared and served to the thousands of people. The volunteers included fishermen who labored over the barbecue and the boiling lobster pots for hours, to young men and women of Santa Barbara City College's culinary program, San Marcos High School's culinary program, and Education First International School and UCSB's Circle K Service Organization. They all did a fantastic job, and we cannot thank them enough. City staff offers its praise and thanks to everybody who contributed this. It's a team effort from all of us'ns who worked on it, to the volunteers, to the fishermen, to there are so many spokes in this wheel, I'm sure you can imagine. And having them all work seamlessly and the teamwork involved really makes this event what it is. So we couldn't be prouder of it. And again, we had a successful day on October 13th. from there to the Parade of Lights. So it's around the corner. We have signups available. They should have arrived in folks' November billing statements. And we have them also at the waterfront office, the fuel dock, and the harbor market. It begins on Sunday, December 9th at 3 p.m. with Santa's Village. We have Santa all ready to go and eager to begin. This is a new Santa, so hope any kids aren't hearing that. Yeah, it's Santa. It's the Santa. But anyway, we have an individual we're working with, and the events begin at 3 o'clock. We have the 10-ton snowfield. There'll be goodie bags for hundreds of kids. And it's become a very important and very much loved element of this event. And then following that, of course, the parade begins around 5:30. Boats will start departing the harbor around 5:15-ish. And then followed by a fireworks show that's going to be much more elaborate than usual for the Parade of Lights, because Garden State Fireworks has generously offered to up the show, because last year, sadly, the Parade of Lights was canceled due to the Thomas fire. And then after that, we have our typical Rockin' Awards party at the Maritime Museum, where it's warm and toasty, and the bar's right upstairs at the Endless Summer. And we have a really robust set of award packages. So we would encourage folks, even if they're only in it for the money, to sign up and participate in the Parade of Lights, because the award packages are, as I said, really robust, and you get your money's worth, so to speak. So that basically concludes my report, except to note that the best views are from the harbor breakwater and from Stearns Wharf. And if you're interested, I can tell you who our judges are this year, but that would be up to you. Would you like to know who our judges are this year?
Certainly.
Okay. Kathy Murillo, Mayor Murillo, will be a judge. Kristen Snedden, City Council member, will be judging. John Kuntz, who's the Commodore of the Yacht Club. Mark Danielson, who is the General Manager of KEYT. And Ken Opplinger, who's the head of the Chamber of Commerce, will be our 5 judges this year.
Wonderful.
So that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Cronman? I've got
Yes, I do.
Please.
So, who is Santa?
Santa is an individual who comes from the North Pole.
Excellent.
I didn't realize
Yeah.
I posed an existential question. Right. Okay.
I will
so
grab
anonymous.
that. Okay.
Distributes gifts to all the kids
Very good.
Okay.
around the world. Thank you,
It's a
Scott.
big night.
Thank you, Mick.
I have the 10-ton snowfield. Is it real snow then, or is it or ice, or how?
It's as close to snow as you can get.
Okay.
It's distributed from
Is it
from a company in Los Angeles that trucks it up. We have, as a backup, we have our own ice machine that makes flake ice and can be used. In the past, we ran into a bit of a conflict. Sometimes fishing are leaving. Sometimes the ice machine might be out of, in repair or something. So our fail-safe has been to go with this company in Los Angeles. We've got our ice machine as a backup.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I do have one question. And first off, my compliments on Harbor Festival. A great event, and you and your staff have done a great job over the years turning this into a major event for Santa Barbara.
Thanks.
I had left by this time, but understood that there was a group, a small but vocal group, that was protesting. And
Oh, yeah.
And I heard that the interaction was cordial. And
It was.
I just wondered if you could fill us in a little bit.
Sure. There was a group of 8 to 10 young men and women who came into the harbor commercial area and peacefully exercised their First Amendment rights. They had signs and were chanting some slogans and what have you. Their position was that fish are sentient beings, they have feelings, and we shouldn't be taking them out of the sea. And they made their opinions heard. And there were a few discussions that took place, but overall it was a very peaceful interaction. And quite frankly, it was sort of refreshing to see, a different point of view, and especially to see young people engaged in political, interests of a political nature.
Very good, very good. I appreciate hearing that it was, whether it was Harbor Patrol or yourself, that it was all handled very, very well.
It was.
So-
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to remind me, when is Parade of Lights?
Oh, yeah. The Parade of Lights is Sunday, December 9th. Voters should make sure to register, and the parade starts at 5:30, but families want to bring their children to Santa's Village at 3. That'd be fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. We move to new business. Mr. Triberg.
I'll read the
Oh,
item.
please, please.
Item 6, 5-year capital improvement plan. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and approve the proposed Waterfront Department 5-year capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2020 through 2024.
Chair Spicer and Commissioners, the 5-year capital improvement plan is a planning tool for evaluating capital project funding needs. It's required by City Charter Section 604, and it's to be submitted to Council 3 months prior to submission of the budget. The budget usually gets submitted towards the end of the fiscal year in the CIP, like as mentioned, about 3 months before. It's important to note that the first 2 years of the CIP are funded as part of the FY 2021 budget adoption. Council adopts a 2-year budget, but we just about every time go back after the first year and take a look again, and they adopt the second-year budget. So it's important to note, although we're looking at 5 years and beyond, the first 2 years are the ones that typically get approved and funded. And just as a reminder, the city typically defines a capital improvement project as having a useful life of greater than 5 years and greater than $100,000 cost. As some of the commissioners may remember, we also track what we call minor capital improvements that have a similar useful life but cost less, and that's something that my staff works on quite a bit. So there's quite a bit that goes into identifying and prioritizing projects, completing a phased project, structural needs, maintaining utility infrastructure, improved efficiency, meeting building code standards, council policy, and public input. These are all things that we take into consideration when identifying projects. A perfect example is the Marina One replacement project. There were 8 phases, and so once you get started, you kind of want to keep going, and it winds up being a priority project. We have 19 projects in the CIP. 10 of them are existing projects. I'm not going to talk about these. You've heard about them before, and I report out on them on a semi-regular basis. The Stearns Wharf pile driving, I usually report on that every year. Stearns Wharf marina renovations, where we rebuild docks in marinas 2, 3, and 4. Parking lot maintenance is the annual slurry seal, so on and on and on. But if you do have any questions about any one of these projects, I'd be happy to answer them. But I would like to focus on some of the 8 new projects that we've added to the CIP that you haven't seen before. Once again, here's a full list. I'm going to talk about a few of them, and they are in your attachment in your staff report, but I'll answer any questions you may have about any of them, even if I don't cover them at the end of the presentation. The first and most significant is replacing our ice house. Mick Cronman, when he was a consultant for the county, worked on getting this ice house built for our commercial fishing fleet in the 1990s. The design goes back to 1990 and 91, and I believe it was installed about 94, 95. It was done with grant funding at the time. It is out of date, unreliable. It is a source of great frustration for my staff and for all of us. And I'm very appreciative that we're having ice coming in from Oxnard for the snowfield for the children as opposed to relying on this. Nevertheless, it's done a great for the commercial fishing fleet. It makes high quality, what we call flake ice. They like it. They've been relying on it for many, many years. And it's time to replace it. So we're really going to redouble our efforts in finding an engineering firm to help us redesign it. And the estimate is about $600,000. That's a pretty loose guess because it's been really difficult to find any firm in Southern California to work with to come up with an evaluation and an estimate. And I'm going to be going up to the Pacific Marine Expo next week, which is a commercial fishing expo, and look for some firms that make ice machines and engineering firms that design them. I hear it's a great resource. There's a lot of exhibitors, so we're gonna hit this one hard. We're gonna go at it and start very soon. It'll be quite a project. It was quite a project when it went in back in the 90s, and it's going to be a significant upgrade for the harbor when the time comes. The next project, 2021, is replacing the lift stations on Stearns Wharf. There are 4 lift stations for the sewer system. One of them is under the Sea Center, and it was rebuilt in 2004 after the Sea Center burned down and was rebuilt. It's a fairly modern one. The rest are pneumatic systems. They're pressurized by air to push the sewage off the wharf up until it's gravity fed into the main trunk along Cabrillo Boulevard. They were built in the 1980s. They're under the wharf. We're standing on a platform probably 6 feet below the deck. They're exposed to waves, storms. They take a beating. They're quite robust, as you can see, and they're pretty reliable, but we really need to look at replacing them. We can't afford to have a sewer spill, and we can't afford to have these things shut down and break down because lots of businesses would go out of business for a long time. This is a fairly complicated project. We've completed kind of a conceptual preliminary design already. The estimate's about $600,000. We'll continue to work with that engineering firm, and you'll be hearing more about this as this design progresses. The next project of note is improving the lighting in the harbor main parking lot. We've reported out to you on lighting improvements throughout the harbor. The parking lot, the main lot is dimly lit. There's not very many lights. And we just did a rough evaluation and came up with a pretty significant cost to add lights and replace lights. There's not a lot. The electrical system is, it's not very extensive there, so there's a lot of pulling new wires and installing new conduits. And going with some more modern lighting, LED lights, and kind of conventional modern parking lot lighting is a type of lighting that's relatively dim, but when there's motion, it brightens up, and that's really what kind of prevents crime and when people want to go to their cars. So it doesn't use very much energy when it's dimly lit, but when people want to go to their cars, or if people have other ideas in mind, it brightens up the area. So this is a project we're looking forward to advancing in fiscal year 2021. The Ledbetter restroom, it's out by the Shoreline Beach Cafe. We inherited this restroom about 8 or 10 years ago. It was a program shift from Parks to us. At the time, it was quite dilapidated. We did a sort of a renovation of sorts with our own staff, put a new roof on and spruced it up a bit and made it much nicer. But it's really out of date. It's not at all code compliant. It's quite heavily used. There's swimmers at the beach every day and kiters, and they really like it, but it's really kind of beat up, and it really needs to be remodeled. I think we could get the thing cleaned up and code compliant and modern for about $200,000, and that's a couple of years out. One thing I'd like to note, when we identify these projects, especially the ones that are more expensive, we kind of spread them out over the years to see where they fit financially. In some respects, it has to do with the need, but a lot of it has to do with when we can afford it. So that's why you see these kind of spreading out. The last project of note I'd like to talk about, and as I mentioned, I'll answer any questions about any of the others, is replacing the Marina One West restroom. There are 2 floating restrooms in Marina One. The east restroom was rebuilt in the late 1990s with the Marina One expansion at that time, which are Q, R, and S fingers. This was built in 1981. It's not in too bad a shape. All of the marina adjacent to it, which was built just before it, has been replaced, as you know. The problem with a restroom like this is it sits on floats, and when the floats deteriorate, that's really that's the structural element. You can't go and just replace the building itself or remodel the building itself because it's going to be sitting on substandard floats. So if you want to update the floats and the sump tanks and everything else, you kind of got to make the whole bathroom go away. You're forced to reconstruct the whole thing. There's kind of really no way around it. We could spruce it up and make it modern and make it prettier, and we do. We change partitions and fixtures, but you kind of got to go at the whole thing when the time comes. This is an outlying year. It's kind of a placeholder. We think we're going to need it, especially in another 6 years. So it's kind of out there on the horizon. It's kind of to make people think that this need is going to become more and more higher and higher priority, I should say. So there's something kind of different about this year's capital improvement plan. In the past, we've prepared what we call 6-year capital improvement plans. This is a 5-year capital improvement plan with projects, foreseeable projects from FY 2025 and beyond included that got kind of replaced this 6th year. And the idea is that once you reach out 6 years, it's kind of hard. You know what you need and what you want to do, but it's a little bit difficult to say we're going to do exactly that, and then when we get to it, we'll build it. It's kind of a wish list. And so what we've included in our CIP is not just the Marina One restroom replacement, which by then we're probably going to need. It might get pushed out a year or come closer a year. But what I really want to bring to the Commission's attention and to Council's attention is replacing other marinas besides Marina One. Marinas 2, 3, and 4 were built originally in the 60s, rebuilt in the 80s, and sort of rebuilt again after the 1983 El Nino. As part of our marina renovations plan, we replace one finger at a time. It's pretty cost effective. They're wood, but it doesn't include electrical upgrades, utilities, and water. There's kind of nominal amount. It makes the docks comfortable, but they're really kind of just gradually getting more and more and more out of date. And something that I'd like the Commission to think about is replacing these marinas into the future. Commissioner Sloan and Kramer sit on the City Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan Subcommittee, and we talk about adaptations into the future related to sea level rise. One problem we're going to have in the marina is as sea levels rise, the docks will float off the piles. So you have to do something about that. You could possibly extend the piles, but a more feasible approach would be when you replace a marina, you put in new piles and you make them taller. And you could kind of incrementally, especially if you went through all the marinas, you could improve those and you would be able to anticipate that need and that change in conditions. The planning, engineering, and permitting would probably cost about $400,000. Starting in FY 2025, we would probably do an evaluation like we did on Marina One, start the planning process and engineering and permitting. It's pretty time consuming. In 2028, we retire some of our certificates of participation debt, our bond debt, and will give us the funding capacity to go out and borrow money to rebuild this marina and possibly other marinas. A rough cost estimate is about $6 million for just Marina 3. That's based on the Marina 1 costs, and that would include replacing it with piles. So this is, like I said, it's thinking out beyond the existing CIP. We're going to have some significant needs, especially if we replace marinas, which we will have to do eventually. So a few things about the capital improvement program is it really identifies funding needs, as I mentioned, and we have a 6-year cash flow projections that we model that we use to identify the fundings available. And keep in mind, it's a 5-year plan, but it's a 6-year cash flow model. So just to make that clarification. A few things we take into consideration. We have reserve requirements. We have operating reserve requirements of 25% of our operating budget. And we also have our Harbor Preservation Fund. And in the Municipal Code, Title 17, we're required to maintain between $2 million and $5 million. So a lot of times we'll use the Harbor Preservation Fund and the Capital Fund interchangeably. So it's really our funds above the reserve requirements and above this baseline of $2 million that we apply towards our capital projects. We also make several assumptions in our 6-year cash flow projection. On the revenue side, we assume there's going to be 2% growth in commercial lease and parking revenues annually. We've been going steady with a 2% slip fee increase for quite a few years now. We don't get a lot of pushback from that, and it seems to help us keep up with debt services increases, operating costs increase. So it's a pretty good formula. And we've also included a 3% increase in slip transfer fee revenues. Brian reports out on that and Mick on a regular basis, and we've done pretty good the last few years, and that seems like a reasonable assumption. On the expense side, we assume 3% increase in salaries and benefits and 2% increase in supplies and services. So they're kind of balanced out against these assumptions for increased revenues. We're required to maintain a debt coverage ratio of 1.5 to 1 pursuant to our loan with the Division of Boating and Waterways. And the reason for that is our Division of Boating and Waterways loan is subordinate or in second position to our COPS debt. It's a pretty high bar, it's a pretty high standard, and the formula goes something like this. Total revenue minus expenses less the debt service equals the net revenue, and the net revenue divided by the debt service is this debt coverage ratio. Oh, it's off by a line. I'm sorry. Now I see it. So this, for 2020, our estimate is total revenues of $15.9 million, Our expenses are 12.6. That's supposed to be under the 15, as you can imagine. And with a net revenue of 3.2 million in our debt service, our COPS at 1.1 million per year, and our Division of Boating Waterways loan 892,000 for a total of 2 million, gives us a debt coverage ratio of 1.58. So two things we look at when we put this capital improvement plan funding together. One is the debt coverage ratio, and the other is the outlying year we stay above $2 million in the Harbor Preservation Fund. So we put all those projects in and we move them all around, and we usually wind up with about $2 million and $1 at the very last year, and right about 1.5 debt coverage ratio. So that's kind of how we do the planning for it. So the recommendation is that the Harbor Commission review and approve the proposed Waterfront Department 5-year capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2020 through 2024. And as I mentioned, I only talked about a few of the projects. I would encourage you to, at this time, to ask me any questions about the overall plan or specific projects, and hope this is something that you can support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Triberg. Any questions? Shohan.
Carl, I have a question about project number 4. Can you talk about the video management system?
Chair Spicer and Commissioner Yaniv, we have a security camera system at the harbor. It's antiquated and old, and we've already done a preliminary analysis. We need to replace it, and so that's what the video management system is. We have a proposal and a design for that.
Is it going to spread to Sea Landing or any other parts of the harbor?
We have the option to cover everywhere. It's kind of sliced up into a lot of different components. This is something we received grant funding for in the past, and we're going to pursue that again in just this next year, working with Mick and our harbor operations, our harbor patrol supervisor, Eric Engebretson. So the scale is going to be somewhat contingent upon the funds available from grant funding, and then how we can implement it. It's kind of difficult because the infrastructure needs are kind of extensive with respect to fiber and connectivity and how all the cameras talk to each other. So, and it's pretty expensive. So we're working on the hardware side quite a bit. But yeah, we expect that in several years we'll have a state-of-the-art video management system throughout the harbor, and we'll eventually cover as many areas as we can.
But this is the video management system. This is just an upgrade to the current cameras or what is in place right now, or is that encompassing everything that?
It's an upgrade and an expansion.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Kramer.
I have two questions. One, in terms of the lighting in the parking lot, are you looking into solar lighting perhaps or not?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Kramer, we will look at that. We have a preliminary plan, and it's pretty expensive as it stands, and we haven't gotten down into a lot of details yet. We're more interested in the coverage. I would like to look at some solar lighting and energy-efficient LED lights. It's kind of a balance between how big of panels you need. This would go to ABR, Architectural Board of Review, so it would go through design review, and I'm sure they would have some opinions on how these things look. But it's certainly be taken into consideration.
And when are you thinking about doing that?
Well, I think I put FY 2021. I have to go back and look.
Okay.
Yeah.
My
not this next fiscal year. I believe it'd be the year after.
Okay.
I'm not looking at
So I
the
would think that would be really important to get done.
Yeah, I think it'd be a great improvement. And it would be really great to include some photovoltaic cells to help, offset the energy.
My other question was about the $6 million for Marina 3, and I'm wondering where will that money come from, and will the Marina 1 have been more or less paid off by that point or not?
So $6 million is based on what we paid. We paid $12 million to replace a little over 500 slips in Marina 1. There's 192 slips in Marina 3, so you do the math, it's like $5 million. I added another $1 million for piles. It's kind of a loose cost estimate at this stage. We have two debts. We have our certificates of participation, which will be paid off in 2028. We have our Division of Boating and Waterways debt that will be paid off in 19 years, whatever that gets us out to. By the time we could plan for the Marina 3 project, which I think we could absorb in our capital fund, we would be ready to we'd have paid off the COPS debt, and we'd be able to borrow again. We'd have a borrowing capacity. We may want to refinance the DBOD debt. We could have new certificates of participation at about that time that would pay off the DBOD debt and create a new COPS debt. So the idea is to pay off one of our loans and then borrow some more money to move forward with replacing Marina 3. Keep in mind, I'm thinking Marina 2, 3, and 4. It's just Marina 3 is a little older than the others, so by the time we get there, it's going to be that much more necessary to look at a whole-scale replacement. So that would be the strategy. Retire some of the debt we have and borrow again to replace that.
I guess I have a third question. Councilmember Greg Hott said to me at one point, it's sort of in passing, that he's been talking about, maybe to you, about the financing of the sea level rise changes and the needs that will have to be done for the harbor. And he said he was suggesting maybe an increase in slip fees or an increase in something. Are you looking into that, into the costs ahead and how that will be financed?
Last year at our budget presentation, we discussed this item with council, and a couple things we've been thinking about for now, and we haven't been given direction to go ahead and have a separate assessment or reserves for sea level rise. We have met with the Corps of Engineers, and we've met with Congressman Carbajal about getting a congressional authorization to study the harbor needs, specifically for the harbor. This is what the Corps does. Once you get that authorization under what's called the Water Resources Development Act, WRDA, I believe, they will go and study exactly what you need. An adaptation strategy is to raise the rim of the bathtub, make the breakwater taller, right, to help protect the harbor. A lot of those studies lead to projects by the Corps, funded by the Corps, and I think it's our recommendation at this time to exhaust that avenue first. And I think we would like to pursue that. The Corps is amenable to it. Congressman Carbajal, I think, sounds supportive of it. It's not quite ripe. We're not quite there, but I think we will be upon completion of the adaptation plan that you and Commissioner Sloan are working on. And we're going to be talking about funding and some of those strategies. And it's really going to be, this is a strategy that I think Scott and I have talked about in detail, and that we haven't quite had a full-blown discussion with the subcommittee that the two of you sit on, with the Harbor Commission or with council yet. But I think that would be a good strategy, and I'm looking forward to the feedback from the different committees and council members as to whether or not they want us to pursue that avenue first, or look into something like a new revenue stream or a new reserve fund for those kind of improvements.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Sure.
It seems that it would be of value for the Commission's Budget Committee to review these ahead of time and kind of review in a little more detail how these fit into, time-wise, into available funding and prioritization and so forth. Is that historically not been done? I mean, it's obviously November now, so it's not going to happen this year, but is that just not historically the way you've done it?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Slight, we do meet with the Budget Committee, and we usually review the CIP as part of the budget review, which is going to start in January, right? Keep in mind the first year or two are funded. At that time, we share with the Budget Subcommittee our six-year cash flow model, and we really kind of get down into the weeds of what we're proposing for revenue assumptions, expenses, and into the details of these projects. Like I said, we as staff look into those details and kind of make these projects fit. We also look at things like the ice house really needs to get replaced. I mean, it is our highest priority project. And we could talk about that, and when we meet with the Budget Subcommittee, we can move these things around, we can defund things, we can change things, because the CIP doesn't get adopted until the spring, and the budget doesn't get adopted till 3 months, theoretically, thereafter. So this isn't set in stone. This is what we are recommending that the Commission support, but it isn't approved until council approves it, and it's not funded until council approves the 2021 budget.
But it's going to the Finance Committee in December and the City Council in January, so the subsequent review by the Budget Committee is pretty much moot by then, isn't it?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Sly, I am not sure about that schedule. I don't know that it goes.
It's in the report.
Yeah, I'm just reading at the end, in the last
Yeah,
paragraph.
in the
of
report here, it
schedule-
talks
of the-
about the timeline.
Not the budget. Yeah, oh, just the CIP?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a goal. I don't think that's quite the schedule. I don't remember it ever going to those that early. And this I took from a previous plan. I think the Harbor Commission Subcommittee, Budget Subcommittee, will have a chance to look at this before it goes to council for final approval. Scott, do you have?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I can jump in, Commissioner Sly. Usually we generally do squeeze a Budget Committee meeting in December just to kind of kick things off since we give ourselves a break on the full Harbor Commission meeting. So I think usually we have one in December and one in January, and then we're pretty much on the way.
And we do review the CIP stuff as part of that.
Yes, it's all part of the 6-year cash flow. We look
Right,
at the
right.
income and expense, then we go to the next page, as you well
Right.
know. I think I've shown it to you, Commissioner Slide, doing our orientation. And then on the second page are the capital projects, and we, like Carl says, we move them around like a jigsaw puzzle to make sure we can keep our reserves at acceptable levels.
Chair Spicer, Commissioner
sir.
Sly, this is something we can get back to you on in the next week or two. I need to reach out with my colleagues at Public Works. They manage the city's overall CIP, so I can get back with a detailed schedule. My recollection is things don't move that quickly.
Yeah, I've never heard of it going to the finance department in
Yeah,
December.
I may have been mistaken here, but we can get back to you. If I can't get back to you next week, it'll be the week after with the schedule.
Okay, thank you. I guess I would just suggest that you make the Budget Committee do a little work and look at the details more, as they're known better now than they were, say, last winter. Make us work on it.
Very good.
I had one.
Commissioner Sloan.
Yeah, and this is a little bit along the lines of what Commissioner Kramer was talking about, and I think it's a little premature. But have you looked at, has anybody looked into extending the pilings rather than replacing them?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Sloan, yeah, we have. We haven't done it yet. We have a technique out on the wharf that I've talked to you about, where we wrap piles with
That's what
fiberglass
made me think
jacket,
about
fill
it.
them with grout, and that
Yeah.
would be a methodology that you could use. We haven't done it yet, as I mentioned. I think we're going to be looking at those sorts of things. Marina 3 is pretty old, and there's a fair amount of wooden piles, there's
Right,
mooring
right,
piles there
right.
too. And for example, Marina 1, we didn't replace the piles. By the time Marina 1 is 40 years old, those piles are going to be 80 years old.
Right.
So I don't know if that was a great strategy. I think we'll be able to reinforce those if they start to deteriorate, and concrete lasts pretty long, piles last long. We see bridges that are 100 years old all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll certainly look into that as the need arises and as an adaptation strategy, I would imagine.
And I think as we go forward, we're not the only harbor that's having this issue. And so, we're going to be able to go to school on some other people that have, come up with ideas as well. And so I think there's going to be a body of knowledge that developed out there in the future that we'll be able to draw on for some of these
Yeah,
things.
I agree.
Thank you.
Okay. Carl, I just had one item. I see that we've got a replacing Patrol Boat 3, and then we've got also repowering Harbor Patrol vessel. Do we have a boat on the way? Can you remind me where we stand with our patrol boats?
Chair Spicer, we replaced Boat 1 last year. We replaced Boat 1 the year before last. We repowered Boat 2 last year. We're repowering Boat 3 as we speak. Boat 3 is an older boat made of aluminum and nothing but trouble. And so we're going to go through one new set of engines, and so therefore we think by the time these engines are worn out in 5 years, it'll be time to replace the boat. It will have kind of met its useful life. We decided to capitalize the expense of repowering boats. It used to be in our operating budget. There's some benefits to capitalizing certain expenses. So what you see there is a repower of Boat 1, because 5 or 6 years after it was built 2 years ago, should coincide with that date, and then on the heels of that, repowering Boat 2 again. So it's going to be this revolving repower of boat 1, 2, and 3, or a replacement when the boats kind of exceed their useful life.
Great, thank you.
And then just as a reminder, boat 4 is a small boat. It's an rigid inflatable boat we use for surf rescues and whatnot, and we're replacing that boat right now. It's a smaller boat. It's a $20,000 expenditure, so we
So
don't
it doesn't
normally
show
report
up
on it.
here?
It doesn't
Yeah.
show up here,
Okay.
exactly.
Thank you, thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Triberg? Okay. Thank you, sir.
I'll make a motion
I was going to say, I believe we have a motion in front of us, so there's a first. Is there a second?
to approve.
I second the motion.
There's a second. Very good. Jeanette, would you read the recommendation that we've?
Yes, recommendation that Harbor Commission review and approve the proposed Waterfront Department 5-year capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2020 through 2024.
Great, and we have a first and a second, so all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any nays? All right, very good. That passes unanimously.
We have something to talk about now.
Okay.
The commission staff communication.
We are at the commission staff communication. Hold up just a second there. Mr. Reedman, any staff commission communication?
Nothing from me, Mr. Chair. Anybody?
Yes,
I-
Chair Spicer. Commissioner Sloan, Commissioner Kramer, and I attended a recent sea level rise adaptation plan subcommittee meeting just this week. And Commissioner Sloan suggested that we share the schedule with the public at this time. This process is a pretty extensive process, and there's a lot of documents associated with it. A vulnerability assessment was recently prepared and completed, and a draft document is ready for release the 26th. There is a public workshop that we'd like the people to know about on December 5th at the Louise Lowry Davis Center. This is a very interesting document. This predicts what the inundation will be in the years 2060 with 2.6 feet of sea level rise and 2100 with about, is it 6 feet of sea level rise?
6 feet.
And it's pretty dramatic. It's the first step. You identify the vulnerabilities. The next step is an economic analysis based on a do-nothing scenario, what the cost would be, the damage to our facilities, critical infrastructure, and then the next step is adaptation. So the subcommittee is going to continue to work on these things. The vulnerability assessment is the first step, and it's an eye-opening document to say the least. And Commissioner Sloan would encourage the public to attend this public workshop. There will be maps there and staff, such as myself, to explain kind of what's going on and update the public on where we are with this effort.
Commissioner Sloan.
Yeah, I would echo what Carl said. This assessment document that we received last week talks about a lot about what happens to the bluff area, to the beaches, to the harbor, things like that over this period of time that Carl mentioned. And so I think the reason why I asked him to put this up is that I would encourage anybody that can make it to attend that December 5th meeting, because there's going to be a lot of good information. And I think as being associated with the harbor, we could end up with some questions to us individually from friends and associates and the public in general about this. So I think anything that we can do to kind of come up to speed on it. It's far from done. We just have the assessment document right now. So we haven't come up with adaptation strategies or anything else. We're developing a framework for how to go about that, but that's going to be work that's going to be done over the next 6 months, 8 months. So it's an ongoing process, but this is kind of the first step. And there was a consultant that prepared this document, and it's a fairly extensive document with maps and all sorts of information in it. And so they're going to talk about that. So again, I just would encourage anybody that can make it to please attend it.
Yeah, and I would repeat that. And the process of the way the workshop will go is staff will give a presentation, and then there will be a Q&A from people there. And there'll be a series of posters and maps scattered around the room so that people can see exactly what they're talking about. I'd also suggest that anyone who's interested look at the city website, which is really very, very full of, and including having the report that we received, and also all the PDFs of the meetings of the 6 meetings that we've had. So it should be a really interesting workshop. So I hope everybody will come.
Yeah, and I don't have the exact website address for that report offhand.
Just search under Santa Barbara sea level rise.
Right, the city
Yeah.
city website has a link
Just
to it.
Santa Barbara sea level rise, and get you several pages and
Okay.
links and so forth.
Good, okay.
Thank you. As this may be the last meeting of the year, I wanted to wish everyone a wonderful holiday, and then really a heartfelt thank you to Ms. Brzezinski, as this may be her last commission meeting, and I just wanted to thank you for all the help you've provided us. So,
Yes.
and hopefully we'll see you in January. But, no, so with that, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn. See one. Is there a second?
Second.
Very good. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Good night.